أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I want to tell you what's actually going on in Egypt. From the time that Britain left Egypt, it left in its place puppets who would do her bidding for her, who would do her dirty work, who would crush any formidable opposition to her interests in the region. Now, the primary interest for the West in general in Egypt is to maintain a large armed force that would, on the one side, keep the Palestinians in check, sustain their caged status in Palestine, and keep elements of the Palestinians like Hamas and other militant elements boxed in. Domestically and regionally, the purpose of this large armed force is to make sure that the Muslims don't overturn the system and rule by Islam, thereby eliminating all influence and interests of the West in the region. That is why America has, for the last, I don't know how many years, maybe 3 decades, given up to the tune of $1.2 or $1.5 billion a year to the Egyptian military. In other words, it's a secular army. And since the assassination of Anwar Sadat, they have ruled Egypt in a state of emergency. Now, there was a hiccup to this when Mohammed Morsi became the president. And so for a year, Egyptians got to know what it felt like to not be ruled by emergency rule. Now, there were still secularists in the country. It's not as if the individuals who made up the top brass of the Egyptian military were the only secularists in the country. No, there were millions of secularists in Egypt. There were still secularists in the country when Mohammed Morsi came to power, but they were not executed. They were not killed. They were not rounded up in midnight raids, tortured. There were no extrajudicial killings. There were no cases of molestation and rape of them in an organized way in the prisons, the way that Hosni Mubarak's rule treated the Muslims calling for Islamic law. And so the whole idea that these Egyptian protesters are oppressed is false. Where was the oppression? Who was killing them? Who was torturing them? Who was raping them? Who was molesting them? Who was harassing them? No. The idea that they were oppressed is false. And now they're back in power. The secularists are back in power. And in 4 weeks you can see the results. Massacres every day in Cairo, in Damietta, in Alexandria. Every day. Just dozens of people killed. That is the rule of the secularists. So the entire idea that Egypt was oppressed under the Brotherhood is false. It's oppressed under secularists. And I'll tell you who the people are. The people who are on the streets of Egypt protesting with the military, in support of the military. These are the same people who, if they come to the West, if they come to Australia or Canada or Britain or the United States, these are the same people who would try too hard to fit in and who would just be ecstatic at the prospect of being in the West. These are the people who would come up to you, maybe a young university student, and say something like, are you going clubbing tonight? Please let me come clubbing with you. Are we going to a nightclub or a night dance club? How do you call it? How do you pronounce it? I really want to go to a dance club tonight. Dance all night. Really, that's it. These are the people, those losers who have this severe, acute inferiority complex, who are monkeys. They want to be like the West. These are the people who did not mind midnight raids in Egypt, who did not mind extrajudicial killings and extraordinary renditions and molestation and rape in Egyptian prisons of the sisters of the Brotherhood. These are the people who are dancing today in Cairo, in Tahrir Square, and who are dancing on the streets today in Alexandria, when right next to them you can see the corpses of the supporters of Islam. They're monkeys. They're monkeys. There is no intellectual national discourse. This is a case of monkeys fighting those who want the haqq, the truth, God's justice, mercy, and law on this earth. Really, these are the people. Oh, I would like a white girlfriend. These are the people who are supporting the military, and they're pretending as if they're brave. How brave do you have to be when you have an army of 1 million people behind you? When you have a budget of $1.3 billion from the United States, and you have, oh, if not 1 million, 500,000, however many men there are in the Egyptian military. I think it's the largest army in the Arab world. And you have helicopter gunships and tanks, and you have missiles. How hard is it to be in the street and pretending like you're brave? You have an army behind you, literally. It's the people in the Muslim Brotherhood who are dying every day in the dozens at least, who are brave, who are fighting. One of the positive things that's actually come out of this is that Muslims will now realize that democracy is not for them. This is not our system. Democracy is okay for everyone as long as you're not calling for Islam. And they'll learn that the only system they have is Khilafah. The brothers in Syria have the right idea. And I also want to point out that in Egypt, in addition to these absolutely monkey-like, inferiority complexed, buffoon-like secularists, Muslims, so-called Muslims, in addition to them you have Coptic Christians, who are about 8 million people in the country. And they are at the helm as well. You have to be kind of familiar with Egypt to be able to tell, but when you look at a lot of the video footage of the protesters, if you look at their facial features, they're Copts. They're not the Arab Muslim population. They're Coptic Christians, and they lived a very privileged. See, these secularists and these Copts, they lived a privileged life under Hosni Mubarak. Ever since the British came, they lived a privileged life, because in the secular world order they were favored. They were conducive to the interests of the West, and they were secularists. So you're a secularist in a secular world order, secular armies, police forces, intelligence agencies, they'll all support you, and you'll support them. They lived a privileged lifestyle, and now they're pretending as if they're being oppressed. All that happened to them is that their privilege was taken away. That's it. So that's what's actually happening in Egypt. These people who are protesting with the army, they are the most treacherous people, because they were nowhere to be found when Hosni Mubarak was killing people simply because they would be caught talking about Islam in the street. That's literally what used to happen in Egypt. One more thing though, what has happened in Egypt now is that Egypt has provided an example of what secularists can pull, with the backing of the West, of course. And so Libya and Tunisia, the Muslim populations of those countries have taken heed and note of this. Libya and Tunisia do not have large Christian populations. And so they have started coming down hard on secular elements within their lands. And so all this has done is strengthened the resolve of the Muslims outside of Egypt to make sure that what happened inside of Egypt doesn't happen on their land. And you see there's at least 150 secularists slaughtered in Syria. Today it just came out, the news came out. Today, July the 28th, I think, or 27th of 2013.